Welcome back to Tutorial Tidbits. I'm Elizabeth St. Hilaire, and this week I'm going to show you how to use that mini stamper tool to use just part of a stencil. So we're used to taking a full gel plate, 8x10 plate, and using a 9x12 stencil and covering the whole thing. And this week I'm going to show you how to use the mini stamper to just do selected partial sections of a stencil and make them even more abstract and more organic. So this will probably apply to some stencils you have on hand, and it's definitely going to apply to one of my newest stencils called Tropical Blossoms. So let's go check it out. In today's lesson, I want to show you how you can use the Ranger. This is my Ranger mini ink blending tool. I'm going to use that to stamp or to dab paint through my one of my most recent stencil designs. This is called Tropical Blossoms. It's lots of fun, but it might be too bold sometimes for collage paper and too much of a recognizable pattern. So unlike some of the patterns that I create, like this one, which is called Wind, this is just sort of random organic patterning and shapes, but these are recognizable flowers, and so they might be for collage paper. They're wonderful for card making and gift wrap and other things, but for collage paper, you might think it's too bold and recognizable of a pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, I have a previously printed light colored solid, and I'm going to take my gel plate and I'm going to put the stencil onto the gel plate, and then with the mini blending tool, here, let's grab another gel plate. I'll use a second gel plate to mix my paints, and then I'll print that so that I don't waste anything. And I'm working on my my non-stick craft mat, which was a filthy mess about 10 minutes ago, but all the paint scrubs off of it. And so it's clean every time I come to make a video and every time I come to make paper. And if you're interested in that non-stick craft mat table covering, that link is below. Okay, so I'm gonna take the pink paper and I'm gonna put out some primary magenta, golden fluid acrylics, primary magenta, and pyrrole orange. And I created this lower layer with primary magenta and white. So I'm going to take the orange and I'm going to dab it through this stencil directly onto the gel plate, sort of randomly and not completely. So I'm just sort of dabbing it around. So rather than getting a complete impression of this stencil, we're going to get a partial. So we're going to lift that off, and then we're going to print. So the control that you have over the dabbing tool, as opposed to brayering the whole plate, is that you get to have soft, subtle bits of the pattern of the stencil rather than the full stencil. Now, I really did get a lot of paint on there for those flowers. So let's try it again. So here's a previous gel print I made. It was really a cleanup sheet, so I kind of cleaned up some extra stuff off the plate, and it's on a base of gold. So because it's on a base of gold and it's got a little orange in it and teal, let's go with the primary magenta. And we'll try not to be so overzealous when we add paint through. So let's do just a little bit. And take it off the plate and come in with our prepared sheet and print. Now here's what I'm looking for. Now you get a very organic pattern from the flower stencil. So rather than, and this is not, these are just two different things. Neither one is, better than the other. This is random, but it's a little more obvious, the flower pattern. This one is softer and more subtle because I didn't put as much paint on, so the flowers are not as defined. I really like the way this is so organic, but yet I get some of the shapes of the flowers. So the mini ink blending tool is a great way to just put paint in partial areas of any stencil and make it more subtle than the full and complete stencil, because sometimes just little bits and pieces and parts are more interesting than the full and complete stencil. So let's try that one more time. Here I've got another cleanup sheet, and I've got the red cleanup from a ghost print and a little bit of teal on the primary magenta. So I'm going to have to go a little darker over this, or a little more opaque. in order to get it to stand up on the top. So I'm going to say let's go darker. I'm grabbing some quinacridone magenta. I'm going to set that out on the second plate on the side. I'm going to put my stencil onto the plate, dab my mini ink blender in, and just go randomly through the stencil and resist the temptation to ink too much. So randomly through, lifting off the stencil and then printing onto become a third layer. So here again, we get bits and partial pieces of the stencil, which is now really more organic and softer edged, and it's allowing the magenta and some of the colors from the previous layers to show through as well. So I'd love to come back in here with the turquoise, because that would look lovely in some of these areas, because I love how that turquoise is poking through here. So I've got the turquoise, and I'm going to put that out on my plate, and I'm going to go grab a clean ink stamper, because that will definitely tint the turquoise to a color I don't want. This is the benefit of having two. The other thing you could do is you could peel the sponge off and switch sponges, but then your hands get totally dirty. So I love that it's a 2-pack. So I'm going to again put this stencil on the plate, randomly go through here and there with a little teal, take the stencil off the plate, and transfer that random bits and pieces of this stencil to the paper in a second layer of the Tropical Blossoms partial stencil. So here we've got the transfer. This is lovely. I like the way that that really stands out on the dark, on the quinacridone magenta. So now we've got more pieces and parts of the stencil, and this is becoming more and more layered and looking more and more organic. The other thing that we could do is we can bring in some of this gold and take the stamper and even just go in and apply sort of where you want a little bit more color and texture. And then again, resist the temptation to put too much on there so that you're covering up what's underneath. And I've got some other colors on my palette over here that I could dab in with as well. And there you go, a beautiful sheet of multicolored collage paper with 2 layers of sponging the mini ink blender and the Tropical Blossom stamp in just some random areas rather than complete coverage. So this one is super busy, this one is a little more subtle, and this one is a little more graphic. Happy Friday, and thank you for being here.